multiplicity here, or is there a single? And how do we determine that? And like that's where we're gonna. I think that we're
Well,
gonna end up
it's a
with.
category error to even ask the question, right? Like you have to like ground out there being numerical
It just
identities
sounds
before
like
you
we're
can ask
just
the
gonna
question.
end up saying that there's a brute fact, and that's where we're gonna be.
No, I don't think we'd say it's a brute fact.
How not? How would we resolve this to such that we could say that? So we're gonna end up at the point in whether it's either like absolutely universal, right, or absolutely or completely particular, right? Because we've basically reduced it to the point of complete simplicity, right? So I'm just wondering like how we're gonna essentially ground the specific identity and then such maintain that the identities which are produced by this field have specific conditions which can then be taken to be, I don't know what, useful maybe,
Well, we're not saying they're
towards
identities, is the point, right?
okay,
Like
okay, yeah, but
yeah, like so over like I hold the p ideal negativism, right? Like I was asking about if it's like a contradiction because I just hold these two views. Um, the the claim isn't that there are like identities at all, right? I mean the claim the basis of the claim or the simplest form of the claim is that there aren't those when it comes to people.
yeah, not when it comes to people, but you're going to have to say that there is an identity in terms of the mental states which you are referencing, or that there is a more primitive identity which you are then referencing as the basis for the equation in terms of utility.
Well, no, we don't have
Right?
to say that there's a we don't have to say that there are like counts of things, right? There's like a particular numbers of things, right? I
You
mean,
don't
like
think that we
you
need
can
to make a
deny his
quantitative
you can deny his
distinction
Satan is
for?
consistent with the view too.
I don't do not see how you could, one, I don't see how you could do a calculation in terms of utility if there's no quantitative like relations.
Well,
And then
it can
two,
be quantitative. It just doesn't have to be like integerized, right? Like as long as it's like a scalar or something. Or if it's the case that it's like a percentage value, right? Those would be the kind of things that just
it's
wouldn't
still
be
going to have to
numerical.
indicate essentially like
Good.
percentage value of what, like you're going to have to relate it to real identities, like it's just you're just pushing it the book, that's
Well, yeah,
all.
it could be a it could be real identities, but it wouldn't be the case that it'd be like or sorry, I'm not even sure what you mean by real identities. By there, do you mean like real numbers?
Like I mean like a specific I mean like a real like identity as in like a specific substance being whatever the fuck you might want to take it as.
What I'm confused about by real, are you using real just to mean like actual, or are you using real to mean like in the sense
Sure,
of real
not an
numbers?
abstract.
Okay. I thought you meant the other thing. Yeah, no, I
No,
like you don't have to grant there being any. You don't have to grant there being any kind of like identities at all in order to have like a grounding for real numbers.
I don't think that you could have anything. I don't think there's anything left if we reject identity. I don't think there's actually anything left. We've lost everything. Like there's nothing. We aren't even
Hmm.
like our words don't even mean anything anymore. Like
Well,
that is so
depending on how you're using like the word everything, that might just be begging the question. But I don't think it's the case that we
anything, everything, just
thing.
like
Yeah, thing.
language specific semantics. Like
No. I think it's still the case that like language can. So like obviously within language, there are a bunch of social fictions that we agree to that we use for communication, and we don't lose any of those just by
I
like
mean,
determining that
I
they're
mean,
talking about something fictional.
I think that we do. I think that like like even in the conversation I had with Divine before, like one of the things I pointed out is I don't think that things can be grounded purely in normativity. Um, and I think that that's where that this is going to lead. I don't think that you can't just essentially ground it in a I do think that there is going to have to be a logical relation here, which is essentially going to say that there is a foundation from which the semantics will then be grounded. I don't think that you can just have like a kind of castle in the sky or sort of spectral conceptual web which doesn't actually relate to reality, but then somehow uh,
No, I
from
think it does relate to reality. Like all the view I'm trying to describe is just trying to describe reality. So I'm not trying to do any like weird, totally abstract kind of stuff. All I'm saying is just that
I
when it like we get well,
that's
I'll do it. Oh, sorry. So in the case of like personal identity, right? Like if I ask like what is it that makes you the same person over time, right?
Mhm.
What would it be that makes you the same person over time?
Well, I would say that that we have the same substance. Like I would argue from like a Hegelian or a Thomistic stance
And you when you say you'd have the same
or
substance,
essence.
what's meant by or
I would
essence?
say
What's
like
meant by essence or substance there?
I would say like a fundamental quality. I would say that it essentially deposes the limits of what being, like the logical relations between a point of existence and non-existence, I would say. And I think a lot of the time we use this reference temporally, but we can use other categories as well.
So how do I determine which entities have the same essence? If I'm like looking at you right now and you in 10 minutes, and then I'm looking at I don't know, like a Moxie who's in the VCR. How do I determine
Um,
which one's which other than just like, inducting from the ways you look?
well, I don't think that induction in terms of family resemblance actually resolves this anyway, because I think when you use induction, you're actually going to have to presuppose a universal in the first place in order to have induction. Like that when you use concepts such as red, for example, and then you say that there's a family resemblance between all of these red objects, you're actually presupposing a universal which allows you to build family resemblance and then relate these objects together. um and a lot of the time that's actually the mind. So you'd say like there is essentially a thinker who is thinking that there is a family resemblance between these red objects, which is essentially the substrate, which then allows you to make this generalization, which you say then is not a universal, right? So then, so I don't think that in general, like a rejection of universals, um I don't think that you will have a particular without a universal. And I don't think if you just think of it as in terms of logical categorization, not even logical categorization, but like logical function, like a universal is essentially something that's like its allness, where a particular is essentially a thisness. And it's so one is essentially a categorization of quality or an indication of a quality, while the other is essentially a limitation of that quality. So I'd say that the particular, like the function of particularity, is actually presupposes the universality to which it is then limited. And I think you see this in Thomistic philosophy, you see this in Kantian philosophy, you see this in Hegelian philosophy, and in general, this is the sort of the way in which logic was understood to work. I think that what we often do now, and I think what happened in general, is that there was a consideration of you end up with this idea that logic and these rules that we perceive are essentially induced, and that reason pre-exists these sort of logical functions. And I don't think any of this sort of works. And then you end up with someone like David Hume, and then all of this essentially bottoms out into a meaningless mess. Yeah,
Well, if you can't do it with induction, are you doing it with deduction?
yeah. I would say it's like you can come to the point in which there are metaphysically indubitable um, realities. So, like for example, experience, and I think like even concepts such as like this, like here and now, I think show like when we try to apply this sort of particularity, it falls instantly back into a universality, right? Where like this is understood to be a specific temporal moment, like a here and now, which is constantly passing and never actually present. And the present is actually a unity of thisness, which already presupposes a universality. So like you end up with essentially it's not that you have to presuppose anything here. It's that you could not think in such a way. These are the rules of thought that you can reach by trying to doubt them. And by doubting them, you will see that you will have to doubt the very faculty you are using to doubt. And then it's indubitable. You can't be free from it. And it's necessary.
Well, that definitely begs the question, right? Like, just like obviously, if somebody's rejecting personal identity, saying something like you use it to doubt, you're not using some kind of like fictional to kind of view there, and you're using it, you're indexing it to some kind of uh, like a realist personal identity view. Then that's just going to beg the question against the view.
No, it
So,
doesn't. I mean, like all I'm saying is essentially that the very reason that you are
well, but
using
if
to doubt
somebody,
reason is to
let me clarify really
essentially
fast,
destroy
just to
itself.
make sure we're on the same page. Like you agree, right? If it's the case that somebody holds to p ideal eliminativism, they're not gonna say on like a realist account of you of what you means. They're not gonna say that you doubt anything, right? They'll say
I
it on
mean,
some
there's
kind of like
what
fictional
someone
account.
thinks they hold, and then there's the what they actually have to hold in order to engage the argument. Like so, like what I'm really saying is that you are it's the actual doubt that is performative. It's like someone saying they're a solipsist. I don't think there's anyone in the world that's actually a solipsist. I don't think it like they can think they are solipsists, but they're wrong.
Well, yeah, no,
Um,
that's fine. I'm just saying that in the case of like the accusation of question begging, right? Like the charge of it, like if there's somebody's raising the charge of question begging, and it's the case that anybody who disagrees with your conclusion would disagree with one of the premises, and that's just gonna clearly gonna clearly be the kind of thing that begs the question.
like yeah, the point of saying like so when you're saying like you're begging the question, you're saying that essentially
Even if
that
it's the case they're wrong about what they believe or
like
something, they'll
I'm
just
not
deny a
saying
premise.
that in order for you to say like what I'm calling into question is how you reach the conclusion in the first place and the reasons that you use to reach the conclusion. So like there's absolutely nothing about this that's begging the question. Like
Well,
I'm
yeah,
not
one of the
saying that
premises is
because
the kind of thing that would just be like outright denied by the view, just directly. Like it's really like it's just
sorry,
trivial to
can you
anybody who
say
holds
that
the view.
again?
You're going to deny one of the premises, and the premise is going to be that you doubt something.
Sorry, could you restate that?
Yeah, I'm saying that anybody who holds the view of PID eliminativism would reject the premise that you doubt, right? Under the account of you that you're using there, they're going to reject.
Yeah, but then okay, like doubt, then you don't have to use it. Like what I'm saying is that essentially the logical function of doubting will simply no longer operate without
Yeah, with
necessarily presupposing a unified conscious being.
hold on, you can propose a unified conscious being and still deny personal identity.
It depends on what you mean then.
Well, yeah, I'm saying that like it's not the case that like there's distinctions between persons.
Right, but are you like when you say a unified conscious being and you say there isn't a distinction between person, what do you take a person to be?
When I say there's not distinctions between persons, so I'll give you my account of what a person is. My account is I'm just indexing the folk usage. So I think it's the case that there's like folk usage is like an incoherent thing, and so it's not the case there could be distinctions between that type of. That's what I'm saying when I say there's no person.
Sorry,
But
like the way you
if it's
sorry,
the case that
and
you
this is
agree
gonna
there's one,
sound like could you just
yeah,
I think maybe because I'm tired, but I don't know if you're speaking really fast, but it's hard to like differentiate the words you're saying. Could you just like
yeah, I
essentially
got you.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So what I'm saying is just that when I'm using the term person in that context, I'm just indexing it to folk usage. So what I'm
but
saying is like I don't think it's the case that the folk have a consistent or coherent notion of personal identity. And so given that they have no consistent notion of personal identity or what a person is, then it's also not the case that on that usage of person there could be distinctions between persons. If you grant that
right.
there's one unified
So what you're
consciousness,
saying is
oh go ahead.
that because there is a multiplicity of the uses of the word person, and that there's no one singular use of that word, that you aren't that's the definition. Like so, you're
No,
saying that the foundation of your
slightly
conception of
different.
person is essentially relative to the ambiguity within the full conception of the term.
I'm not saying there's like a despair, like a variety of views among the folk, and since there's a variety of views, then it's not the case that any particular views carry. I'm not saying anything like that. I think it's the case that for any particular view among the majority of the folk, the thing they're referencing when they talk about a person is not the kind of thing that's consistent or coherent. I don't think it's the kind of thing that can be set out into
Right.
like necessary and sufficient
But then
conditions
that's
or be
not
well
like.
formed.
But then like that doesn't tell me what like so that's all you're really saying is that I'm saying that there is no fundamental meaning to the word person. That is so like 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 there is you're not saying there what you're saying is there is no definition for this word.
I mean, there are definitions for the word. They're just not the
Yeah.
kind of thing that's going to capture most people's usage.
Yeah, but what you're saying is that none of those definitions are like you're not taking any of those definitions.
No.
Right. And now so when you say in your argument person, it's not doing anything.
Well, no, it
I
is. It's indexing into bulk usage.
but that like that's like look man like
Look. If I said that word here, like if I say that like flurple
it,
blurple doesn't have a meaning, like if flurple blurple is not in the dictionary, flurple
yeah
blurple doesn't have a definition, right? That's the kind of thing that can do something. I can express something by using that phrase. It's
like
just a use mention distinction.
look at it like this, right? So in your argument, the fundamental principle in your argument here is to say that you can reference like essentially what is it that you could reference a person, you could reference like the person, but then you would basically say that essentially it is groundless. Like there's nothing actually there, right? So like the reason so like I would essentially be question begging by saying that you are presupposing personhood. And then so when I say that then you said like you could argue for a unified consciousness that wasn't a person, and then when I ask you what a person is, you basically say I'm not adopting any concept of a person, like any specific concept of a person. So how the fuck do you know that it's not like because my concept is a unified consciousness. So it's like it's
Well, I'm
it's
not
like
clear on what the
gonna
concept
talk
is. Still, is
uses
the issue was
it's gonna
right.
include
Your
unified
concept
consciousness.
was your concept was based on like in essence, and you said some particular type of quality, and I'm not sure what the quality is. So
I
I'm
understand
not
that.
even
It's
I'm
just
like
one of
right now
those,
I'm like agnostic that there even is a concept there.
right?
And if your concept of a
Like, look at it
just to
like look at
one
it
more
from
thing that I
the
want to clarify. If your concept of what a person is just this one unified consciousness, then it's the case there wouldn't be distinctions between persons in your view either.
what I'm not saying there is a single unified consciousness, but I'd say like the unification of a conscious being would be essentially be, I think, a necessary. I'd probably say a property. I wouldn't even say a property. Maybe, yeah, maybe a property of a of the. Right.
Well,
Like
yeah,
I
I'm
would.
asking what kind of relationship it is.
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying is that if we were to then apply those relationships, like a categorical relationship, to what is a universality, we're going to be limiting it into, and that can be useful, but that's not going to be able to actually indicate what like the actual unity of the individual. Unity of the individual is essentially the unity, a logical self-referential relationship. It's not like a it would be the, you could think of it as a form, like the form would be the unifying factor,
Yeah,
if
I'm
that
just
makes
asking what like so if I were to give like a specific example being like you, if I were to ask you what is it that you could tell me that's true about you at all points in time, it would always be true for you in any possible world that you're in, right? But that wouldn't be true for me, right? Is there anything that you could like point out there?
Yeah, I think that you could say that. I suppose that you could say that my existence in certain space and time. I think you could also say,
Well, without using words like my that are just going to contain the same notion of the same
okay, the
person identity.
existence of specific spatial and temporal coordinates, relationships to other objects.
Don't
Um,
I have all those? I've
no,
got
you don't have
relations
the
to other
exact
objects.
same. No, like your historicity, your relations to other objects are going to be defined different, such that I can demarcate you as separate relative to me by indicating spatial and temporal coordinates, and I can say I was touching the table that day, you weren't touching the table that day, or my relationship, my causal relationship between, essentially anything else in existence or existence itself would be able to be indicated through the application of a different concept. So like
Wait,
that's the,
so if it's spatio-temporal coordinates, if the
it's not just
spatio-temp
spatial temporal
well,
coordinates. Yeah.
if they're a necessary condition to be you, right, is to have the same spatio-temporal coordinate, then you would say there's no possible world where you're in a different room right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in possible worlds. So
I'm not asking if you believe they like exist concretely or something. I'm just saying you would say it's the case there's like a contradiction in terms to say like you could
yeah,
have been in a different room.
yeah.
Huh, it's kind of strange. You so I'm sure to make sure that I'm following. You're saying that it'd be a contradiction in terms to say that you could have been in a different room. You could have like gone to the store yesterday. Like any of these terms, like any of these like
Yeah,
counterfactual terms
I
about
would
you.
argue for what's called what's it called providence.
Okay. So that's kind of weird. That's interesting. So your view is that in the case of like any kind of like language usage, um, that talks about counterfactuals about you that involves like changes in spatiotemporal coordinates, even if it's like I could have gone to the store yesterday. Like all those statements are like either false or non-propositional.
No, I think they're meaningful relative to the real me who was who had the choice. So relative to the actuality. that potentiality is given meaning.
But I thought it was just the case that they were a contradiction in terms.
Like as in like I like to say that I could have is to reference that I was an agent with choice at that moment in time. That's all it's doing. To say
Yeah,
that
but if it was the case that you made a different choice, you would have been a different agent, right?
I would be a different agent. Like I would now be a different agent. Like in the yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
if it was
like
yeah, so if it was the case that you had made that different choice, you wouldn't have made that different choice. It would have been a different agent making it. So it'd be like
yeah,
contradiction in
in a
terms.
matter of speaking, yeah.
Yeah. So it'd be a contradiction in terms to say something
Like
I could have
obviously
done otherwise.
like it would in some respects it would what it does is essentially it says that like everything that does happen is necessary, and it opens up the point of necessitarianism. Um but the point is that if we take a kind of four-dimensional eternalist view of time and to say that time is essentially eternally completed, then the individual, which comprises all the temporal states, which are essentially relations of a being from, let's say, point A to point like Z, within these within the I don't really like the term time worms and stuff, but you could use something like that. um, and then you could obviously apply other logical relations as well. So it'd be like relative. I'd prefer things like sufficient reason. Like, so for example, I would say that like our essence would be best categorized as the kind of sufficient reason, which would be relative to other, which would be understood as relative to other objects within within the totality of existence. Otherwise. But the reality is that the specific actualization of certain potentials at all of those time points would totally dependent upon the upon that subject. So the accidents themselves are defined by by the subject. So like rather than the other way around. Like the subject might be the totality of the accidents and known through it, but the only reason that those potentialities were actualized is because of the actuality that pre-existed it. And that's where like you would see like the Hegelian response. So um in this kind of like versus the sort of scholastic tradition in this. So I would say that yeah, you can be like free. You can actually have be free, but have um be defined by essentially a providential relationship with God. Like He knows everything you can have and will have ever done. Um, and it is necessary prerequisite to what you are, that you are the person that would engage in this way. That is your essence.
Are you
Um,
do you hold that there are true contradictions, or are you like a dialectheist?
no, I don't believe in true contradictions. No.
So if it's the case that like the counterfactual talk about you being at different spatial temporal coordinates is if that's a contradiction in terms, wouldn't that just mean that they're false?
As I said, like it depends on what we're speaking about. Like I think that there are specific things that if there, and I think you can derive specific accidental qualities which are necessary prerequisites, and some that aren't necessary um, accidents and some that aren't. So I guess it would depend on how we're analyzing the subject, like and the how essential or the well yeah essentially whether this would impact the essence of the subject, whether they would be understood as a coherent identity, as a single
Well, you
unified
said it.
identity.
Well, under the conception you gave, it would, right?
It would mean that you had like essentially different accidents such that you would be understood as a being like, so for example, if I take you as a subject and I was to say you have a fundamental substrate, like a substance, and then there are these necessary accidents. So, for example, the time and date of, like, let's say the time and date of your birth or something, right? Um, and then the time and date of your death, like in this respect, and that you would exist in space time, between those 2 points, right? Like that is necessarily that seems to be a necessary categorical relationship, which shows that you are a temporal being, which can only be understood in temporal terms, such that your existence and your substance is given meaning in reality, right? Um, that would be like a necessary accident. Like a non-necessary accident would be, let's say, you going to the shop on a Thursday, right? Like you're existing in that time. Your choice to do that was not necessary, but it's necessary in one respect, but not in another. And Leibniz clears that up. Like everything that happens in the past is necessary in one respect. Like it necessarily did happen, but that didn't make it necessary for you to actually. It's not necessary to your essence. It doesn't provide the conditions of your sufficient reason, right? But in many ways, you can kind of see how this would lead to like the formulation of the subject in at the end of their life. So like you could have been a different way and that would be fine, but you're not. Like you can still talk about that because you could still have a separation between these necessary accidents and these unnecessary accidents. And that's the way a scholastic would talk about, for example, your soul, which is why, you could become a bad person or you could become a good person. And your life is essentially a world of soul making here. And the choices you make essentially determine who you are choosing to be. And that is a real choice, which will then formulate you into an individual which has the real identity, which then can be judged as being positive or negative by God, right? And that's where you get judgment and all of this stuff from.
So just walk through this with me so I can make sure that we're on the same page. In terms of if any statements are contradictions in term and contradiction in terms, we would agree that statement's false, right?
Yes.
Okay. So also it's the case that any statements about any counterfactual statements about you that involve you being at different spatiotemporal coordinates, those are all contradictions in terms, right?
Not necessarily. That's what I'll try to say. So like there is like the category of space and time and how, let's say, your birth and death, right? Like when you came in and out of existence, in terms of temporality, that mark essentially boundary conditions for the existence of your substance. But like your specific actions relative, um, within within that essentially category, no, not necessarily. They could be essentially accidental, but non-necessary accidents.
Well, in that case, that seems like it isn't the case that having the same spatiotemporal coordinates is necessary to be you.
It is in one
Logically is
respect.
what I mean when
No,
I
I
say
mean
necessary.
yeah, logically it is. I mean, it is the application of like essentially a category of time, such that you have existence that your existence is defined in a temporal way. The specific points and the specific relations that you have temporally would be is not the same. So it's like there is the logical category, and then there is the specific accidents from the application of that category, like your
Particular spatiotemporal coordinate.
I never said the specific. I said you'd have to have temporal coordinates, so like a birth and death. You'd have to have like specific temporal conditions, like a categorization. But like your relationship between those space, like those spatial temporal coordinates, that's not like those specific coordinates on what's defining it. It's the actual logical
Well,
category and your substance's relation to it. So like the substance being in time, that's it. That's necessary. The specific times that your substance is in, like T1, T2, T25, I don't know, like those don't define the substance.
well, no,
Like,
you have to have been referencing particular spatiotemporal coordinates, not just having spatiotemporal coordinates at all. Because the initial question being asked was just, what is it about you and you in 10 minutes from now, right? Which unifies those beings doesn't apply to me. Obviously, I also have spatiotemporal coordinates in your view. You have
mhm,
spatiotemporal coordinates. What you
yeah,
want to say is, in order to differentiate those, if you're bringing up the spatiotemporal coordinate, it has to be
yeah,
the
like,
particular spatiotemporal coordinates that have.
well, I guess,
Like on time
I
t,
guess,
you do such and such, right?
no, I think you're right. I think I have misspoke because in reality, like what I'm saying is not that we are being unified by particulars, like characteristics here, that our unification pre-exists those characteristics, right? So like in order for us to say that there is a substance or something like that in the first place, that there is this unity, like we're going to have to particularize and we're going to have to say that there are certain conditions or limitations like time, space. In which case, like I was born on a Wednesday at 10 o'clock or some shit. And that like that brings meaning to what it means for me to be. But my substance, it comes into time, right? Like from a Thomistic point of view, it's not something like it is the unity or of a quality which has come into time,
Okay, so
right?
you
Like
would.
it's not defined by the time, like the specific times, but it can be only understood by its relationship to time. So like it's not an abstract object like from a like a platonic form, right? And it's not like a particularist conception of reality where it's a bundle like David Hume. It's kind of in between, where both the Thomist and I'd say the Hegelian as well is arguing that the essence of the individual is defined by this relationship between universality and particularity. And that logical relation, like when I said before, like this logical relationship is like necessary for our understanding of any identities, and rejecting this and going like, essentially when you're talking about quantum fields, and I said like if you go infinitely particularized, it becomes meaningless. If you go infinitely universal, it becomes meaningless because I'm not able to then divest real identities. And in which case, I'm not talking about anything. Like my point is to say like I can talk like the talking in general, engaging with specific identities, having an understanding of the world presupposes real identities, that there are actual concrete identities in the world. Like you cannot rid yourself of that.
Okay, so is if I asked you, is it the case that it's logically necessary that you made like, I don't know, there's like some random choice you made this morning, like to, or maybe we'll just say that top into the VC, right? Um, was it logically necessary for you to make the choice to hop into the VC, or like do you agree that like you could have done otherwise?
I could have done otherwise. It wasn't logically necessary.
Okay, so if I asked you what is it that's logically necessary in order to be a perspective, how with philosophy, right? What is logically necessary in order for you?
Think that maybe divesting time into time blocks would even make sense, specifically without first presuming identities. But essentially that there would be a connection between this organism from first to last. I mean, you would need that for the organism anyway, to say that it is the same organism, um, or even to say that there is a single organism. You're going to have to be able to say that there is essentially a unification in time. Um, so it's basically the properties in which, like, if you were to lose, like like the logical properties that if you were to lose, you would lose the consideration of me as an organism.
Yes.
So if the same organism was like
After
moved,
rubbing
hold on, John, you should mute up locally. Um, if the same organism was moved like 20 feet north, right? Like same room or something, just across the room, that would still be this. That would still be the same organism. It's not like a
Yeah.
contradiction in terms. Okay. So then it is logically possible for it to be the case that there is that organism over there, and also is possibly the case that organism's right where it is currently. Is there any reason why that particular organism? Is there anything about that particular organism that stops it from being two places at one time?
Well, I mean, like in terms of like the